That's what I was going to ask you, like, what to do.
What can you do?
Like nothing, I know, and I know
certain realizations happen, they have certain side effects. They'll either be short-lived or they will be permanent.
Mm-hmm.
Permanent, I'm meaning as far as you're living in the body. What else can you do?
Nothing, yes.
You can predict that if you were to continue traveling down this path, what may arise in the future. So therefore, you might, if you can expect certain things may happen under these influences, when they happen you will not be so surprised. So don't be afraid of the change and transformations that might occur, which inevitably will have a certain amount of destabilization attached to it. And with destabilization, you have to expect that your comfort zone is going to be challenged, that certain things are going to be shifting in you, which might provoke unfamiliar ways of thinking, unfamiliar ways of feeling. And the fear of the loss of control is certainly a hindrance to that process. So how do you think you can better equip and prepare yourself? Because I'm telling you, it's not just a matter of Kundalini awakening or anything like that. All of the major breakthroughs that happen in the spiritual process are by nature sudden and spontaneous. If Kundalini awakens, it's spontaneous. If you suddenly, for the first time, have that shift from concentration to meditation, it will be spontaneous. If you enter into certain depths where, as I had expressed, where, for instance, you feel like the sensation of the physical body is dropping, some practitioners, as a result of that, they experience the fear of losing. They think of losing the body. So they think they're going to die in their meditation. That's also a sudden experience. And then samadhi itself, where the dualism between observer and observed comes to an end, that also arises suddenly. Or let's say you're contemplating on certain issues, like let's say the reality of death. What is death? What are contemplating the impermanence of death, of life. Even when you come to striking insights like that, where you see something from a totally new perspective, that also arises suddenly. So the suddenness you can definitely expect if you continue moving down along this path. The question is, you want to be prepared when that sudden experience arises. So one of the best ways to prepare yourself is to become more familiar with the territory. What is the mechanisms involved in all of these things, so that when they do happen, and especially if you attain to a certain mastery over your mental and physical system, you will be able to handle it gracefully. It's one of the reasons why I was encouraging you to continue practicing the asana, so that you could transform your physical body into a steady and firm vehicle. So if, for instance, Kundalini awakens, your body can handle it gracefully and it won't create any damage to the system. So why do you feel you're not psychologically prepared?
Well, I guess I don't feel psychologically prepared in like my regular life, so I assume that...
Maybe you're caught in a dilemma. Some part of you wants to gravitate to the external life, another part of you wants to move towards the internal life.
Yeah, that's right.
And you're caught in the middle between these conflicting voices.
Yeah, of course. That's what it is.
So a compromise, a sacrifice has to be made.
No.
And one shouldn't assume that one has to be involved in one at the expense of the other. I feel that one of your major problems is a lack of integration. You treat your yoga and sadhana like something that's isolated, set aside for an hour or two, and then there's the rest of the movement of life.
Yeah.
And that can't be the approach of a yogi.
No, I agree.
Your sadhana has to infiltrate all areas of your life.
How do I... because I find like at one point I was integrating it, and then I stopped, and then now it feels like two separate things. It feels like my regular life is like one thing, and then when I take my 1 hour or whatever, when I want to ask my sadhana, it's like a complete separate thing, and it doesn't feel like there's like a merging of the two.
The only remedy is to practice continuous watchfulness as a habit in the midst of your daily life, with such reinforcement that such watchfulness eventually starts to become effortless. But to do it in a way which is systematic, because in the way that we are active in the world with so much stimulus, it can be very easy to go off track, and then all it takes is a moment of forgetfulness and we're lost in a downward spiral of forgetfulness.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would recommend is, while you're involved in your daily activities, there should be two different kinds of objects of meditation. There should be a primary object of meditation, meaning there is one constant factor that you're returning to time and time again. Let's say anchoring your attention to the body. So for instance, you're walking down the street, being mindful of the movement of the legs. You be mindful of the sensation of the body. But your object of meditation is going to be changing, not because you're seeking for something to observe, but by necessity. And what I mean by necessity is you're walking down the street, you've approached now the traffic light, now you turn your attention to the traffic light. Is it green? Is it red? Are there cars passing by? At what time? Now that becomes your new objects of observation. Observe by necessity, allow that experience to pass. Okay, green light has now appeared. It's time to continue with the process of walking. Once again, you return back to the movement of the legs. Now you're approaching a restaurant, the door of a restaurant. You extend your arm now to open the door. Now you bring your attention to the sensation of your arm. Be extremely sensitive as you're, even in the most minute, insignificant gestures. Open the door, walk into the room. But, of course, in your daily life, you're not walking for all of your waking hours. Sometimes you're sitting, sometimes you're standing. So now you sit on the chair. So now, be aware of the posture of the experience of sitting. And that becomes the new primary object of meditation. So think of it like this. You have a primary object of meditation which can be changing over time. But the point is there should be a common anchoring point, a single object which you return to time and time again in the midst of all these changing scenes. And the reason for this, can you guess the reason?
What's the reason of what? Of
why do we have this common anchoring point to return to time and time again?
What practices your recollection?
It strengthens your concentration, right? And to be able to withhold your attention like that for a certain stretch of time, it needs to be fueled, it needs to be empowered. It needs a source of energy.
Mm-hmm.
So for this reason, you strengthen your concentration so you have a firm foundation for your mindfulness.
Okay. I'm going to do that.
So remember that a wandering mind need not be an absent mind.
Can I ask a question though? Like, let's say when I'm at work, sometimes my mind trails off because the task is very repetitive. And sometimes I use that time to my mind sometimes goes on ideas, and I let it continue with the ideas.
Mm-hmm.
How do you bring mindfulness into that? Because I find if you forcefully start becoming mindful of something while that's happening, you lose that spontaneous effect of let the idea flow by itself.
Mm-hmm.
How do you integrate mindfulness into that aspect?
Well, any effort for mindfulness is obviously interfering with the process. But you have to interfere until the point comes where you're spontaneously meditative by your own nature. You will have to interfere. You'll have to learn to shift this habit between getting lost in forgetfulness and then bringing yourself back into wakefulness by being sensitive to the present moment. That has to happen, and that inevitably is going to change the quality of your thoughts to some degree, because the moment you become conscious of your stream of thoughts, it brings a certain different quality to it. So this is to be expected.
Do you, okay, like, you know, like how, let's say, like...
However, for instance, just as you can sit down silently and repeat a mantra, and not only hear the mantra, but listen to yourself repeating the mantra, why can't you be intensely involved in a certain stream of thoughts and still be observant through the whole experience?
You're right.
It's a bit more challenging, it needs a little bit more refined attention, but if you cultivate it, it shouldn't be that much of a problem.
Okay.
But I really think your problem is a lack of a systematic approach in your daily life. So just keep it as a reminder that the easiest thing to observe in your experience is, as we've talked about many times, is the physical body. And that depending on which part of your being you're observing, you need different kinds of sensitivity. Physical body is often the most accessible because we're familiar with it. So we need, that's the sensitivity which most of us have, which makes us able to watch the body a lot easier. But watching your thought process, you need yet another type of sensitivity. It's more subtle. Thought is not tangible and visible like the physical body. To watch your moods and your underlying emotions, that may need even more subtler sensitivity, because in the background of your thoughts there is a general atmosphere. So the process then is to develop these different kinds of sensitivities, but in a way which is more systematic. So this is how I recommend for you to bridge the gap, so that your sadhana is not some isolated island, to first adopt a systematic approach and then stick with it. So for instance, for 1 month straight, as you're involved in the midst of your daily life, you will let your body be the primary object of meditation. Let's say everything else be secondary. And then once you're more familiar with watching the body, then you can go on to, let's say for instance, your emotions now become the primary object. So you're closely watchful over your emotions, and then everything else is secondary. If they're distracting experience from your emotions, turn your attention there, observe, let the experience pass. When it no longer disturbs the mind, you bring it back again to your emotions. And that could be a period of time which helps you to deepen your insight into the nature of your emotions. So, what do you think? How can you approach?
I like that idea.
Because you can't spend your entire time being watchful of only one particular thing. That's why I say your primary object of meditation will change by necessity. So you need not search for things forcefully to observe. Let the shifting scenes come to you, and you become observant by necessity. And also sometimes when you're in the midst of life, we can get entangled in overwhelming feelings and experiences. And often it's a very egoistic process when you become identified with it. So therefore, learn to observe what manifestation of I takes place. That can also be an extremely powerful process. Because if we're going to examine into the nature of the ego and then therefore conclude that the ego is an illusion, we have to know what it is which is being negated, right? And the only way we will understand the ego is through true acceptance. So to observe what kind of I manifests. Is it a prideful I? Is it an angry I? Is it a fearful I? Learning to observe the many masks of the ego. So that can become included in the midst of your everyday mindfulness. You'll see in your daily life, inevitably, the ego is always rearing its head time and time again, appearing and reappearing. So you want to be highly sensitive to all the games and tricks of the ego. This is yet another reason why one must learn to integrate one's meditation. As I said, all it needs is a single moment of forgetfulness, and you're lost in a torrent of forgetfulness. Then how easy is it to strengthen and reinforce certain so-called bad habits? So set it as a goal in mind.
That's what I'm doing now.
Another thing you can do in the midst of overwhelming experience, it's a more indirect approach, but it can help. If you're caught in, let's say, overwhelming greed or anger, turn your attention of the mind onto the opposite qualities. For instance, if it's overwhelming anger, you can turn your attention to the image of Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha of compassion. Or imagine your own body assuming the form of Avalokiteshvara. Hold that in the mind. Concentrate on that one particular idea or sensation, and you'll see, you'll start gravitating in a different direction. And you will also be dropping seeds in your unconscious mind which will leave its suggestions. And that can have an influence on your everyday behavior. So eventually, the qualities of Avalokiteshvara become your qualities. So therefore, that strategy is identifying the problem and then administering the remedy. So applying antidotes, so to speak. But of course, it's an easier method to approach. It's more accessible, but it is indirect. And of course, what produces the most efficient results is the direct approach. But it's often less accessible.